What's up, everybody? Welcome to a Modern Horizons 3 initial impressions video for limited, of course. This is just going to be a short, set at a glance kind of video. Next week's when we're really going to be ramping up the heavy-hitting content. Set review video coming out on Monday and Tuesday. I'm also going to have my pre-release tips, tricks video that I usually do going up Wednesday, but for this video, I'm hoping to make this set just a little more digestible. These Modern Horizons sets are pretty complex. There is a lot going on. So I'm just going to give you my initial read of what's happening here. I'll look at some of the archetypes, touch on some of the many mechanics that are in the set. And generally, I just want to give you the heads up of things that I think are going to be helpful to know as we start to learn the format. I'm taking a slightly more makeshift approach to this video. I've just got the Mythic Spoiler webpage up here with all the cards just laid out. I'm going to be jumping around a bunch of cards as we talk about them. So yeah, let's just get to it. So if you want to approach this set from the perspective of what is different about this set compared to a normal standard legal draft set, I think the number one thing you're going to find is that the individual power level of all the cards at common, uncommon, rare, all rarities is just quite a bit higher than you would expect. They can really push the limits of these cards because they're bypassing standard, they're going straight into modern. So an example here is Galvanic Discharge. It's a single red mana for an instant at common. Choose target creature or planeswalker. You get 3 energy. And if you haven't played with energy before, they are just counters that you as the player get. You don't lose them until you spend them. There are ways to get rid of your opponent's energy, but I don't think there are any in this set. So you get 3 energy. Then you can pay any amount of energy. Galvanic Discharge deals that much damage to that permanent. So this is like a lightning bolt for creatures, instant speed. You can cast it early on a cheap creature, on a 1 or 2 toughness creature, have some energy left over to use on something else. Of course, in the late game, you maybe kill a 4, 5, 6 toughness creature. So just super efficient answer. Another one here, good example, Horrific Assault. This is a single green mana for a sorcery at common. Target creature you control deals damage equal to its power to target creature or planeswalker you don't control. And then if you control an Eldrazi, and there are a lot of Eldrazi in the set, you gain 3 life. So this is a pretty direct comparison to hard-hitting questions from Murders at Karlov Manor. That was a strong uncommon. And we get this at common. It's just a better version of that card. Fell the Profane might be another good example here. This one's an uncommon. It's a MDFC double face card, land on the back, spell on the front side. It's 2 black, instant, destroy target creature or planeswalker. But of course, it has that modality of being a land on the backside, which is just a gigantic upgrade on just your 4 mana, destroy anything removal spell. And of course, the threats scale in power as well. We've got something like Writhing Chrysalis, which is 2 green-red for a 2/3 Eldrazi drone. It's got Devoid, which basically just means this card is colorless. There's a lot of cards in this set that care about when you cast a colorless card, how many colorless creatures you have. But it says when you cast it, you get 2 0/1 colorless Eldrazi spawn creature tokens with sacrifice this creature, get a colorless mana. The Chrysalis also has reach, and whenever you sacrifice another Eldrazi, you put a +1/+1 counter on Writhing Chrysalis. So this is sort of like a 4 mana 4/5 reach that gives you some mana. It's a 4 mana card that gives you 3 bodies, just really strong. Another one here, Mandibular Kite. Single white mana for a living weapon equipment at common. The equipped creature gets +1/+1 and has flying. The equip cost is 3 and a white. And living weapon, by the way, if you haven't played with it, it just means that the equipment comes in with a 0/0 black germ token, and this equipment auto-equips to that. So almost sort of like the 4 Mirrodin cards from All Will Be One. And there's also a modified theme in this set. A lot of the archetypes care about having a modified creature, which is a creature that is equipped, enchanted, or has a +1/+1 counter on it. So this should being a 1 mana 1/1 flyer that counts as a modified creature that has late game utility. So basically what this means is that when you're going through this card list and you're just reading all the cards and you're going like, oh, that seems like a pretty good card. That seems like a pretty good card. You're going to say that for basically all of the cards. It's almost like Cube in that way, where there are very few blanks. There are very few cards that aren't going to look strong. There's definitely some cards that are more constructed focused that you can just be like, okay, probably not going to be playing with that. Buried Alive might be a pretty good example of that here. I think most things in this set have the potential to be very strong in their respective decks. Usually in these Modern Horizons sets, every card has a place, has a home they go, which is cool. I do like those sets where even kind of like the niche commons, they have somewhere where you're like, okay, I actually want them in this deck. And sometimes I think when you think high power level, it can sound a little bit scary from the limited player's perspective, because it's like, okay, higher power level often means like good higher rarity cards. Maybe there's a bunch of like busted bombs, busted mythics, busted rares. I actually think that relative to the uncommons and commons in this set, the rares are probably less good than the rares from like Thunder Junction or even maybe even Markov Manor. Because the commons and uncommons are so pushed, the rares and the mythics aren't that much better. So I don't think it's going to feel like there's a giant disparity when the opponent has a good rare. Where something like in Thunder Junction, where yeah, the commons and uncommons were good, but they were nowhere close to like a Vaultborn Tyrant or a Bonnie Paul or something like that. The other thing too is with increased power of removal, like just having a 1 mana card that can deal with a 5 toughness creature in the set, for example, at common, that just means that your answers are better. So if the opponent does play a good threat, as long as you're managing your removal well, you can often deal with them. Of course, this doesn't mean that there aren't going to be really good rares and mythics from time to time, but higher power level across the board generally means that the games come down to being about the rares a little less often. All right, let's touch on some of the archetypes here. So I've got a very helpful graphic that somebody posted on Reddit here, just kind of laying out how all the archetypes, the 2-color pairs interact. All 10 of the 2-color pairs are technically doing their own thing, but a lot of them have overlap, so you can actually group them by wedge in a lot of cases. For example, Jeskai, blue, white, green, is energy in this set. And each of these energy decks, like white-red, blue-white, are doing something slightly different. So for blue-white, you've got like Flyers energy. For red-white, you've got aggro that cares about energy. Then you've got the modified decks, which are Obzon, white, green, black. You've got the Eldrazi decks, which are Temur, blue, green, red. And then you have two kind of like outlier decks that don't fit into those 3 big themes. We've got black-red affinity / artifacts / there's some like sacrifice, steal and sack stuff going on. Basically anything black-red usually does is kind of shoved into this, but it does have a main artifact theme. And there's a blue-black draw 3 control deck. So we'll go over some of the cards for these archetypes, but I think it's just helpful just to kind of think of things in this way. And archetypes in general in these Modern Horizons sets tend to be a little bit loose, almost like Thunder Junction, if you want to think about it that way, where, yes, sir, you did have some very focused decks sometimes, the very focused green-white mounts deck. When you got there with that, that was awesome. But there's a lot of crossover with the cards. Like, one of the things about the cards in the set is they do have a lot of words on them, and they tend to have a lot of moving pieces that will interact with other things. So, for example, you might have an equipment that is good in the modified deck, but also is an artifact, but also is a living weapon, so it gives you something to sacrifice, right? Like, you see that generally in most sets where they want the cards to play well in multiple archetypes, but you even see that a little bit more often in these kind of sets, in Modern Horizon sets, because the cards tend to just be a bit more complex, just have more stuff on them, so there will be more archetypes, more crossover synergies between the decks. So let's start with the energy decks first here. I've got on screen just some cards that sort of show the differences between the 3 different energy decks. Like I mentioned, blue-white's a little more focused on flying, red-white's going to be like a ground attacking deck. Blue-red is one that I think a lot of people are going to be excited about. There are a lot of like engine-y cards that once you assemble them all, you get all your like Rue Goldberg pieces going. You can use your energy on whatever you care about. Very much like what people liked about Kaladesh. I think you're going to find in this set. I think a general trend for the white energy cards is that they're using energy as a means to be better in combat. So something like Voltstorm Angel, for example, it's a 5 mana, 3 white, 4/4 flyer. Then when it ETBs, you get 3 energy. In the beginning of combat, you can pay 2 energy to choose one. Either the angel gains flying and vigilance, or other creatures you control get +1/+1 until end of turn. There's also creatures that like gain first strike when you pay some energy, or tap something and you pay some energy. So you can definitely just think of the white cards as like a classic aggro deck with energy as its supporting theme. But then we get to some of the blue-red payoffs I want to go over here. There's Is It Genitorium? It's a blue-red artifact at uncommon. It says if you would get 1 or more energy, you get that many +1 energy instead. You can tap it to draw a card. Activate this only if you've paid or lost 4 or more energy this turn. We've got something like Royal Cartographer, 2 mana, 1/3 at uncommon. Landfall, you get an energy. Tap, pay 6 energy, draw a card. Unstable Amulet, another kind of card draw artifact here, is pretty strong. 1 in a red for an artifact. ETBs get 2 energy. Whenever you cast a spell from anywhere other than your hand, the amulet deals 1 damage to each opponent. You can tap the amulet, pay 2 energy, exile the top card of your library. You may play that card until you exile another card with Unstable Amulet, so that's a little bit different than we usually see with these red card draw spells. Phyrexian Ironworks is a 3 mana artifact in red at uncommon. Whenever you attack, you get an energy, and you can tap it to pay 3 energy, make a 3/3 golem creature, activate only as a sorcery. So you kind of get the idea, right? Like, these blue-red decks are finding ways to get energy. A lot of the creatures have enter the battlefield, get energy effects. I imagine in this, like, more blue-red controlling mid-range style engine deck. You might even be splashing some of the white energy creatures just to up your density of energy payoffs. There's also a really good removal spell payoff here I want to call out, Reiterating Bolt. It's 1 red for a sorcery at uncommon. It's got Replicate, which means you can cast this spell, copy it for each number of times you paid the replicate cost, and you can choose new targets. The replicate cost is paying 3 energy. The bolt deals 3 damage to target creature or a planeswalker. So just a really, really nice payoff. Basically just be like a one-sided field wipe if you've got enough energy, if you've got enough energy cards in your deck and you're building towards this. Also, Tune the Narrative, most likely going to be an important card here. Single blue mana for an instant, draw a card, you get 2 energy counters. So yeah, I think this is a really cool looking deck. Like I said, if you were somebody who really liked Kaladesh, liked like the era of innovation, decoction module style of decks, I think there's a lot of that stuff going on, and it is really well supported. There's just a ton of cards in this set that care about energy. All right, now let's talk about the modified decks, which, like I mentioned, are black, white, and green, those color pairs. And a modified creature, once again, is a creature that has a +1/+1 counter on it. Or sorry, any counter. It could be any counter, but mostly +1/+1 is what you're going to find in this set. Is enchanted or has an equipment on it. And for each of those 3 things, there is a mechanic that they've brought back that you're going to see quite a bit. So the equipment mechanic is Living Weapon. That's the one that comes with a 0/0 germ token. And we've got the Colossal Dread Mask, 4 green for a common. The equipped creature gets +6/+6 and has trample. And it's got an equip cost of 3 green. And that's another thing about Modern Horizon sets. If you haven't gone through the full card list or played a Modern Horizon sets before, there are so many callbacks to old Magic cards. It's very much a love letter to Magic's history in a lot of ways. The enchantment mechanic, one of my favorites actually, is Bestow. So this is from Original Theros. You're going to find Bestow on creatures, and Bestow says, if you cast this card for its Bestow cost, it's an aura spell with enchant creature, and it becomes a creature again if it's not attached. So example here, Glyph Elemental, 1 and a white for a 2/2 enchantment creature. It's got Bestow for 1 and a white, so same cost. Landfall, when a land enters the battlefield under your control, put a +1/+1 counter on Glyph Elemental, and the enchanted creature gets +1/+1 for each +1/+1 counter on Glyph Elemental. So you could just cast this on turn 2 as an enchantment creature. That will be modified as well, because you're going to get, +1/+1 counters on it as you play lands. Or you can bestow it onto something. It becomes an aura that basically grants the creature the same ability, and when that creature dies, the Glyph Elemental falls off, and then it becomes a creature. Also, if you go to enchant a creature, and your opponent kills the creature from under you, you don't lose the Glyph Elemental, it just becomes a creature, it just falls in the battlefield. And then the +1/+1 counter mechanic is Adapt. So all Adapt says is, it's gonna have like Adapt and then a number with a cost, and it says if this creature has no +1/+1 counters on it, whatever number of +1/+1 counters on it equal to the Adapt number. So Evolution Witness here, another callback card, this one to Eternal Witness. 2 and a green for a 2/1 at common. It's got Adapt 2 for 2 mana, 1 and a green. And whenever 1 or more +1/+1 counters are put on Evolution Witness, return target permanent card from your graveyard to your hand. There's also a smattering of returning mechanics that help with the modified theme. So stuff like support on card like Area Auxiliary. This is a 4 mana 3/3 flyer at common. Then when it enters the battlefield, you support 2, which just means put a +1/+1 counter on each of up to 2 target creatures. And again, we're really seeing the ramped up power, right? This is 5 power and toughness for your 4 mana. 3 of it has flying. All right, Eldrazi now. So there's the kind of 2 Eldrazi decks. There's red-green and there's blue-green. Red-green's a little more focused on just beating down, killing your opponent. Blue-green's a little more focused on ramping and getting to these gigantic, the classic mega expensive Eldrazi. There's a lot of good, like, 7-8 mana payoffs in this set. Really strong card for either of those decks here, Eldrazi Repurposer. This is 2 and a green for a 3/3 Eldrazi drone at common. It's got Devoid, so again, that just means it's colorless. Whenever you cast this spell, and when the Repurposer dies, you make an 0/1 colorless Eldrazi creature spawn token with sacrifice this creature, add a colorless mana. Also worth noting that while these are like in the teamer colors, blue, red, green, there's also like a 4th color, quote unquote, in colorless, where there are cards that need specifically colorless mana. You need a colorless source, like Breaker of Creation here, 6 colorless for a 8/4. Whenever you cast a spell, you gain 1 life for each colorless permanent you control. That includes your land, so this is going to give you a lot of life when you cast it. Hexproof from each color, Annihilator 2, which means that when it attacks, the defending player sacrifices 2 permanents. And there is a cycle of 10 sort of fetch lands at common that tap for a colorless mana, but then also sacrifice to get one of 3 basic land types, and also have cycling for one of each of those basic land colors. So you're gonna probably want the Teamer one here, Bountiful Landscape, a little bit more than the other ones. I imagine this is going to be the highest pick of the bunch because this is the one that touches the Eldrazi colors. And then rounding up the color pairs, the last 2 decks here, the red-black artifact deck, like I mentioned, and the blue-black, whenever you draw 3 cards, something good happens deck, kind of like a blue-black control deck. Not going to go super deep on these ones because, you know, I think we can just save that for a later date. Just want to give you an overview of what's going on here. But one thing I want to just leave us on as far as archetypes go is often with Modern Horizons sets, the real, like, things that make your deck tick are the interactions between the cards and finding interesting interactions. Like I mentioned, because there are so many words on these cards and good words that interact in different ways, you're just going to, as you play the set, find some cool little things. Like one thing that I did notice about blue-black, or I should say somebody in my Discord, Danelius, noticed this, is you've got Sneaky Snacker here, which is a 2-mana, 2/1 flyer that says whenever you draw your 3rd card in each turn, you return the Snacker from the graveyard to the battlefield tapped. Well, that combos really nicely with something like Eviscerator's Insight, which is your classic, like, 2-mana instant, sack a creature, draw 2 cards. It also has flashback for 5 mana, but you can just sacrifice your Sneaky Snacker, you get that back immediately, and you've drawn 2 cards. So those little kind of interactions that exist in every set, of course, you're just going to find a few more of those kind of interactions. So as you are learning the format, as you're becoming more familiar with the cards, I would just kind of like look out for those 2-card little interactions, be like, ooh, that plays really well with that, because I think in the early weeks, that's really where you're going to want to get your edge from. Just like very much the idea of making the deck more than the sum of its parts. And the last thing I want to leave us on today is this cycle of dual lands at Uncommon that are MDFCs. They have spells on their front side. I imagine these are all going to be great, all going to be really high picks. They just upgrade your land slots in a pretty meaningful way. Like not only do you get a dual land, but you get a pretty good spell on the front side for all of these. For example, we've got like Stump Stomp here, just a 2-mana bite spell. Glasswing Grace, the black-white one, is a aura that gives the creature +2/+2 flying and lifelink. It's kind of funny. The rate of these cards is actually more what you would see on just like a normal card in a normal draft set. But for Modern Horizons, these are a little bit overcosted for what you're getting. There's also another cycle of these that aren't dual lands. They're just monocolored lands on the backside that come in tapped unless you pay 3 life. And everything I just said about the dual lands is pretty much the same, right? These are going to be high picks. You're going to want these. Upgrading your land slot is great. Flooding less often is really good. You do generally want to just replace your lands with these 1-to-1. Sometimes if you have, you know, 3, 4, 5 of them, you're going to put some of them in the spell slot. But I think for the first 1 or 2, it's just a pretty easy swap in, swap out, take a land out, put these spells in. And that's going to do it for just some initial impressions here. I hope you did find this helpful. Like I mentioned, next week, so we're really going to ramp things up, get all that content out to get you really prepared. If you're new to the channel, consider a like, consider a subscribe, all that stuff. We'll be back soon, and happy drafting in the meantime.